I'm Dennis Anderson along with Julie Zenner. Here's what's coming up on Almanac North.
50 years after the monumental March on Washington, how far have we come regarding race relations? We'll be joined by African-American community leaders with their perspectives on the issue.
Minnesota's oldest child-caring agency celebrates its 130th anniversary this year. Tonight, learn more about Northwood Children's Services and its impact in the region.
And we'll have the week's business news and a news file story from 25 years ago.
Don't go away. Almanac North is next. Hello and welcome to Almanac North. Thanks for watching. This week's show was recorded on Wednesday due to the Labor Day holiday weekend. And Julie, seems like summer just arrived and already it's Labor Day.
It is Labor Day weekend already, but I will take some more of these dog days of summer. I hope it extends out a little bit
Same
longer.
here. Like all of September would be nice, wouldn't it? All right, we've got some excellent topics this week. Let's get started.
All right. Thank you, Denny, and welcome everyone. 50 years ago this week, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave one of the most famous speeches in U.S. history. His I Have a Dream oratory helped galvanize the civil rights movement and has remained an indelible moment in American history. And while our country has made major strides in the decades since the speech, recent events have proven that we still have some work to do in the issue of race relations. Joining us now is Carl Crawford, coordinator of the Intercultural Center at Lake Superior College, and Xavier Bell is the Director of Community Engagement at Community Action Duluth. And thanks to both of you for joining us today. Carl, let's start with you. How do you think Dr. King would feel if he were to be dropped into today's society and could look at the progress that's been made over the last 50 years?
I think at first he would be amazed at some of the progress that's been made, but I think he would also still be hungry for the progress that still needs to be made. As we still fall short as people of color in 5 disparities in education, healthcare, and other opportunities, I think he would grab that energy that we need to help propel us to move us forward to reach those goals.
Xavier, any place in this country, do you see another man who sort of fits the bill of Dr. Martin Luther King? Is there another Dr. King out there who is doing what he did so eloquently so long ago?
I think his legacy created a level of ownership for both you and me to be him. Because I think his message was that as a leader, his focus was to be a catalyst, to encourage people to take on the mantle and move it forward. And so from the standpoint of just the civil rights movement, yeah, there are a number of leaders who are still deeply engaged and involved in process, but I think the goal, honestly, is to challenge us as a community to take on some responsibility.
Carl, what emotions do you feel as you watch the anniversary activities that are going on this week?
Wow, the incredible sense of pride and responsibility of the indebtedness that I have for the many people that stood on those shoulders of the staircases and faced the dogs in the water hoses so I could enjoy some of the freedoms that I have today.
And do you have certain hopes as far as what you would like to see come out of this celebration that we're having right now?
Absolutely. I would love to see a renewal to the commitment of the dream, an opportunity for us here in the Northland to stand shoulder to shoulder and make this dream come true, because we can make that happen.
When you look at the Duluth community and Northeast Minnesota, what are the areas, Xavier, where you think we're doing well in terms of racial equity, and where do you think more progress needs to be made?
I think what I see is the work that I do challenges people to see the value of building relationships. And I think from the standpoint of bonding capital, the closeness we have towards one another, I think is the catalyst that is really interesting for the Northland. I think we grow up together, we spend time together, you know, we're so closely knit that, that we can't help but get to know each other. I think the improvement opportunity is to get to know each other across these racial divides, across these socioeconomic divides. Where because and I don't know if it's because it's cold up here in the wintertime or I don't know, but you know, we come out of our hibernation. I think we need to be intentional about reaching across these divides. If you don't know folks, it's time to, you know, get to know it and stop demystifying these relationships. I think that's the improvement opportunity we need to have.
Here's a question you can both answer. When you look at what happened today in Washington, 50 years after the big event there, what emotions do you feel?
Great question. I think for me, obviously the sense of ownership, that I still, that check has not been cashed. There are still insufficient funds, as Dr. King so eloquently talked about, that aren't delivered to those that need the help the most. So I felt great pride. I wished I was there to be a part of that celebration.
Xavier, how about yourself?
Feel. I guess in some ways I felt anxiety from the standpoint that we have had to still address this issue as a country. I think we are a strong community, strong country, and once we get, you know, put our hand to something, we achieve the things we choose to achieve. And I think the issue that's prevalent is the behind-the-scenes stuff of race. You know, while we can do the outward stuff to make sure that we're a community, we're close-knit, you know, we can spend time together, I think the policies, the practices, those things that have created the vehicle of race still need to be addressed. You know, race in itself is a man-made concept. It's not real. However, the impact of race and racism is real. So how do we as a society start to address those concerns and then really begin to see that, well, we have such a neat opportunity to start to make things right. And I think that's when King would come to the table, maybe raised from the dead, and say, that's what I was talking about all along. That's why he began to move towards socioeconomics, honestly, was because he began to see the value of the civil rights movement, but then he began to see that there were poor Appalachian whites that were struggling, and the systemic nature of poverty was, you know, intersecting everyone in this great country.
I think many people thought when President Barack Obama was elected that was maybe ushering in a post-racial society in the United States. Do you see his presidency as having advanced the cause significantly?
I see it as a monumental step, but when you look at us, people of color, as a group, we are still not making those leaps and bounds that it would take for equity. And I think it's a false sense to say that because we have a black president that we can check the box and racism is over.
That's not the case.
That is not the case by far.
I want to get this right. Dr. King called the March on Washington the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
Yes.
We haven't had another demonstration like that, have we, in 50 years? Why is that?
I think a lot of it, if I could imagine, is putting the onus on our children. Anytime you talk about racism or changing our societies or communities, we look at our children first, and we don't emulate the behavior it really takes to change a nation. And Dr. King was so committed to nonviolence, but yet we still look at violence as a solution to solving many of the world's problems.
I'm going to ask both of you this question, but I'm going to start with you, Carl, because you work in education.
Yes.
In the Duluth schools, there's a very high dropout rate for African American students. It approaches almost 57%. When you look at the fight that civil rights activists made in trying to gain equality and trying to gain access to education, what do you say to those young people in our community, in the African American community here in Duluth and around the country, who are making the choice to drop out of school?
I think we're not reaching them. There's holes in our safety nets. One amazing thing happened after Brown versus Board of Education is that we lost a lot of people of color as teachers. instructors, and it matters. It really matters that the kids can emulate and see that mirror image of themselves as far as reaching their goals. So we need to sew up those holes in our safety nets, and we need to ask that question, why is an education important for our kids today?
Do you think that education is being valued in the African American community?
Absolutely. I think that's the wrong question, though. I think the question is, are we providing an education to our kids? I think that's the question. If I look at disparities, I think of the canary in the coal mine. Because there's an aspect of oppression that's impacting communities of color, in particular in this instance African Americans, we would be the first to respond to negative connotations, negative indicators, canary in the coal mine, okay? Because we're reacting to the system of something. So I think the output that we're seeing, especially in graduation rates of kids of color, is an indicator that the truth behind that is 37% of all kids aren't graduating in Duluth public schools. So while there's a disparity for poor kids and kids of color, the reality behind that is we're experiencing the same thing, except it's marginalized.
But with that in mind, is there any advice that you would give to children of color to maybe navigate a system that perhaps isn't fair or isn't working for them, but would help them get through it and come out on the other end successfully?
I think part of that goes to the school district, our system, our parents, and an opportunity for us to understand that not just kids of color, but all kids are important to Duluth and surrounding areas, and that we need to succeed in this nation at teaching our children.
And then directly related to the kids is that, you know, we have an opportunity, a great opportunity as African American males to spend time with African American kids. And there's no intellect gap. There's no knowledge gap. You know, these kids are just as smart as any other kids. The thing that we see is the process of engagement is not working. So how do we not only put ownership in the hands of the kids to make sure that they're successful, but make sure that the system itself are doing the things that we need them to do to make sure that these kids are successful. So I think we put too much emphasis, if you will, on the young people themselves, because they're resilient.
You bring up a good point. I have a granddaughter who's a Mayan Indian, and as she has aged now she starts to notice, hey, there's a difference between me and other kids in school, where for a while there wasn't any kind of a difference. I mean, it never even entered her mind. Is there a certain age with kids when all of a sudden we discover that, hey, I might not be the same as you, and what's all this all about? And they start asking questions. Address that a little bit if you can. I mean, you see it in schools.
Roughly around the third grade, but ironically, you see that happen in college as well.
Really?
As we see students come in and realize that, imagine if your culture was always seen as different or not doing things the way others do them. You could see what could happen. So the buzzword of retention is all over our nation as far as students of color and students not succeeding and continuing on with their education. And a lot, as X pointed out, needs to look inward into the educational system and while it's failing so many people.
How do you take the conversation forward now as you mark the 50th anniversary of the march and you look toward the next 50 years? Where do you think we as a nation should be focused?
I think actually Carl and I are establishing that framework as we dialogue, is that if we're not willing as a society to look at the systemic nature of race, then we're not willing to deal with the issue of race. I think we can look at the outward manifestations of race, the experiences individuals have as they go to the store, as they, as they are discriminated against. But the concept of race is intentional. It's designed to keep us apart, to create leverage, to create difference. And until we're able to acknowledge that as a society and to start to deal with those policies that have reinforced that, one, for instance, that we did address in time was redlining. Redlining was a policy, that was established by the government to make sure that certain people had advantage, certain people were disadvantaged, and it was supported. So how are there other things like that that we are aware of, that we know, that need to be addressed? I think as a society, as we begin to start to look at that scrutinized process, begin to really start to address that we're we're more the same than we are different.
Yeah.
And then start to spend our capital, if you will, social capital, political capital, whatever it be, towards addressing those concerns, then I think we'll be a better society for it. But until that time,
Yeah.
then I don't hope we're revisiting the same conversation at the 100th year anniversary of Martin's, March on Washington.
And I think there needs to be a new commitment to nonviolence. We continue to use violence as a solution, and that's really not the way. Dr. King showed us that love is the only way to create lasting change.
All right, and on that positive note, we'll draw it to a close, but Xavier and Carl, thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you
in.
both very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's dig into our news file archive for a look at what was making news 25 years ago this week.
This is the largest truck of its kind in the world. It cost $1.3 million and can haul 240 tons. And to taconite manufacturers, it's worth its weight in gold.
We're very excited to be involved with this particular truck and the manufacturer, because our intentions are to try to cut the cost per ton of mining in northern Minnesota.
The truck was shipped from Wyoming, where 4 others just like it have boosted production at the coal industries there. It will find its home in Hoyt Lakes, Minnesota, at the LTV Steel Mining Company by next week.
The truck itself hauls 240 tons, which is about a 41% increase over what the largest trucks in LTV's mine are currently hauling.
If the truck works out as well as expected, there is hope it won't be the last like it to make it to the range. Of course, getting one of these trucks from Wyoming to northeast Minnesota is no easy task.
It took 10 people and a week and a half to turn 5 normal-sized truckloads into this vehicle, the world's largest truck. Colleen Burns, KDLH News.
Northwood Children's Service has been around for 130 years in Duluth, yet it's an agency that you don't often hear about. Now, over the years, Northwood has served more than 30,000 children and now has over a dozen facilities in the city, including 2 K-12 schools. With such a milestone to celebrate, Northwood is opening its doors to the public next week. And joining us now to tell us more is Dick Wolleat. He is the president and CEO of Northwood Children's Services. Congratulations, Dick, on such a record 130 years. Can you tell us about some of the origins of Northwood?
Sure, yeah. It's as fascinating early history, actually, which is inextricably kind of woven into the development of Duluth. 1883, if you recall, Duluth was a boom town, so a lot of people moving to town. And at that time, there were a lot of young women finding themselves here, some with young babies, some pregnant, and of course there was quite a stigma attached to that in those days. And a local woman, quite an activist and kind of an early feminist, Sarah Stearns, who was married to Judge Stearns in town, saw what was happening and decided that it would be a good idea to assist these young ladies and their babies. So in the back of Fogelson's Fancy Goods store, which was located on Superior Street, she and some of her friends took these young women in, taught them a vocation, helped sort of find them a job, and cared for their children in the meantime. So that was the history of it. She, interestingly, was a big player in the suffragette movement at the time, and also had convinced 13 of her friends to apply to go to the University of Michigan, even though they didn't admit women at the time, to make kind of a public statement. So she was quite an interesting individual.
Talk about the kids who you work with today.
Sure.
What are they dealing with in their lives?
So all of our kids are have a diagnosis with a mental illness. That sounds sort of morbid, but what it means is that they've had serious and persistent difficulties for a year or more with their functioning at home, in school or in their communities. So the average age of the kids we serve is about 11. And so the most prevalent diagnostic categories of the kids we serve are children who have what's called reactive attachment disorder, which is disruptive kind of attachment with their primary caregiver that happens sometime between birth and 18 months.
Sure.
And also children who have been exposed to a lot of trauma, kids who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. So those are the two most sort
Which
of
would
common.
affect maybe their behavior, perhaps their emotions.
Well, absolutely. And
Yeah.
when you put those two together, so an attachment disorder means that for whatever reasons, the primary caregiver of kids is really not able to meet
Yeah.
the kids' needs.
I'm not even sure I'm using the right word, client, but how do the children connect up with Northwood
Yeah,
Service?
no, that's good. We call them students,
Okay.
Danny, because they are students. So we get referrals from other mental health professionals in the community or in other communities that we serve. In our residential programs, we serve kids from all over the state of Minnesota. In our day treatment and outpatient services, of course, the kids are more local. We serve a more local kind of a population. So we get kids from, psychiatrists, other mental health professionals, schools, daycare providers in town. We also operate a day treatment program for preschool kids. It's a combination early childhood and day treatment program. So we get referrals from those kinds of places.
And then what kind of services do you provide to them?
Well, we have an array of services in terms of intensity. So we have our most intense services are residential treatment. We have two campuses, one on College Street and one out on 40th Avenue West, where we have an on-campus school, as you mentioned in
Right.
the intro. Those kids live with us for about 9 months. They go to school typically on our campus, so we provide everything from psychiatric oversight, psychological testing. We provide individual, family, and group therapy, and we provide a lot of life skills training. So we try to really, while the kids certainly have deficits and challenges, we try to turn that around and really give kids opportunity to develop assets and really to be in a much better position to be successful when they return to their home communities.
We mentioned,
than
Dick,
they were
that
when they
students
came.
are K through 12,
Yep.
taught by Duluth Public Schools
Yes,
teachers?
Danny, good question. The schools are ours, but they're staffed by ISD 709 teachers. So we have very small classroom sizes because the kids also have had a lot of difficulty, most, not all, with academic kind of work. So we have very small classes and typically a certified teacher and a paraprofessional in each class. So we're able actually to make up about 2 years in key reading and math progress for every year that they're with us. So it's pretty astounding. Once the kids get into a stable, kind of predictable environment, they really flourish academically as well.
And looking at that video, lots of smiling faces
Yeah.
that we were showing. And I
Yeah.
know there are confidentiality issues,
Sure.
but how personally have you seen Northwood really impact lives?
Well, we hear it's the most affirming thing, Julia, that we do. I mean, when kids come back with their families and they say, Dick, you guys made such a difference in my life. Can I show my kids where I live? I mean, it's sort of sad in a way that they needed us at the time in their lives that they did, but it's also really affirming that they see this as the most positive time and they go on and on. Remember when? I tell you, I just came back. I'm probably kind of sunburned. I just came back from 5 days. We take all the kids to a camp north of Brainerd in Longville. And we ride horses and we shoot bows and arrows and we have silly skits at night and we fish. And the joy that these kids have every day, believe me, they're worn out by the end of the day. But the smiles on their faces and just the absolute, because a lot of these kids would have never had that kind of an opportunity. So, it's really rewarding when kids or their families or, when they come back and tell you those little moments. I always tell the staff, don't ever underestimate how important you are in the lives of these kids, because it's really humbling when they come back as a 40-year-old and they remind you of some very small incident in your relationship with them and how critically important it was to them.
So there's residential and day treatment. Day treatment, would those children still be living in their homes then?
Yes, Denny, which is something that's really developed over time. We've really grown in our day treatment services, that we provide. So those children do live at home. They come to us for both educational services, and then we do 3 hours of group therapy each day. So we do 2 hours of kind of skill building training, then an hour of psychotherapy, and then we do individual work with the kids and really work with them intently in the classroom as well to deal with, help them learn better ways to sort of get along once they go back to their public schools.
Well, you must be doing something right. You've been in town for 130
yeah,
years.
well, I think so. We have a long and a rich legacy.
And you have an open house coming up.
We do, thank you. We do on September the 7th out at our West Campus, which is on 40th Avenue West and right above the railroad tracks. Don't worry, it's the last place it's open before the Big Dig, which is what I'm calling that project now. Noon to 1, we'll have lunch. We'll have a short program at 1 o'clock and tours that kids will be leading.
Sure.
So it's a great opportunity to get to know a little more up close and personal what it is that we do.
Dick, thank you very much for coming in and telling Northwood's story.
Appreciate the opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it's time now for the week's top economic news from the folks at Business North. The Minnesota Department of Transportation has dropped an option to reroute U.S. Highway 53 to the west side of Virginia. That proposal was opposed by business owners who were afraid their buildings would be bypassed. The existing highway must be relocated by 2017 so Cliffs Natural Resources can mine taconite beneath the road. If it is moved too far, several company owners say they will lose the vehicular traffic that is the lifeblood of their businesses. MnDOT officials say they will re-examine alternative routes, keeping in mind that community and environmental impacts also must be weighed.
Lake Connections, the county-owned fiber optic network in Lake County, hosted a grand opening Wednesday in Two Harbors to showcase what the broadband project will bring to the rural area. The $70 million venture is slated for completion in 2015, bringing more than 2,000 miles of fiber cable to homes and businesses. Its first phase includes the cities of Two Harbors and Silver Bay and is currently underway. So far, more than 65% of Lake County residents and businesses have agreed to a fiber drop on their property.
Separate meetings were held last week in Chicago with the Gogebic Taconite Company, federal regulators, and tribes from Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota. The meetings addressed concerns that have risen about the proposed 4.5-mile-long open-pit mine in northern Wisconsin. Bad River Tribal Chair Mike Wiggins said it was important to put environmental protection and preservation on the table rather than simply addressing restoration and reclamation. An EPA spokesperson said the meetings produced some good ideas to better coordinate the process that will be followed if the project develops. For more on these and other stories, visit businessnorth.com.
Well, don't let your voice be silent. Call now if you have a comment. Dial 218-788-2849 to leave a message or send an email to Almanac North at WDSE.org and visit the WDSE website for the latest news and information about the station, program updates, and links to PBS programming. And Julie, next week, Almanac North is off the air due to a special PBS presentation on our national parks.
That's right, and with the long weekend, this might be a good time to visit some of the national parks in our area over the Labor Day weekend.
Yeah, they're a beauty, that's for sure. We'll be back on Friday, September the 13th for the first show of Almanac North's 22nd season. Until then, for Julie and the crew here at Almanac North, I'm Dennis Anderson. Have a great weekend, everybody, and be kind.